The judge leaned forward, his hand hovering over the gavel, and said, "We're ready to make a ruling." In that moment, I felt my world tilt. I couldn't breathe. My nails dug so deep into the courtroom table. I'm surprised they didn't leave splinters. Every cell in my body braced for impact. This was it. I was about to lose my son, and then, out of nowhere, my 6-year-old stood up. Theo. My quiet, gentle Theo. He stepped into the center of that cold, echoing courtroom, holding a piece of paper he had folded into his Spider-Man backpack that morning. His hands were so small, yet they held that letter like it was a shield. His voice, when it came, was soft, but it sliced through the room like a blade. "Your Honor," he said, "I want to read something." That was the moment everything changed. Before we dive in, where are you listening from right now? What's your story? Drop it in the comments. I'm Emily Green. I'm 33 years old. Freelance graphic designer by trade. Widow by circumstance. Mother by sheer stubborn love. Our story takes place in a small town in Oregon. Not the postcard kind with quaint shops and tourists, but the regular kind chain stores, cracked sidewalks, and a community that mostly keeps to itself unless there's gossip to be had. 2 years ago, my life cracked open. My husband, Aaron, died in a car accident. One rainy Tuesday morning, a patch of black ice on Route 42 took him away from us. He was my best friend, my steady place, the person who knew how to make sense of me when even I couldn't. I remember exactly what I was cooking when I got the call. Chicken stir-fry. Haven't made it since. After that, the days blurred into each other. But somehow, even in the fog of grief, I kept moving for Theo. Every morning I packed his lunchbox, walked him to kindergarten, smiled through the lump in my throat. Then I'd come home, lock the bathroom door, and let it all fall apart. Theo never saw me cry. At least, not at first. He was 6, with the kind of big, solemn eyes that made you think he understood more than he should. And maybe he did. Kids are like sponges for pain. At night, we'd curl up on the sagging couch under his dinosaur blanket. He wouldn't say much, just lean into me and whisper, "It's okay. Mommy, I'm here." That little boy became my anchor. Enter Margaret Langston, my mother-in-law, and from day one. Margaret had made it clear I wasn't her idea of suitable. She thought I was too plain, too ordinary, not polished enough, not from the right family. I was the girl from the wrong side of the tracks who had the nerve to marry her son. Aaron used to brush her off, say she'd come around. She never did. When he died, Margaret slid into our lives like a cold draft under a door. At first, I thought she was grieving, thought maybe, for once, she was trying to connect. I let her visit. I even welcomed her to Theo's birthday parties, school recitals, Sunday dinners. But grief wasn't what brought her close. Control was. She criticized everything. My parenting, my finances, even the mismatched clothes Theo liked to pick out for himself. She called it coddling when I sang him lullabies at night. She said I was too soft to raise a boy properly. One afternoon, I found her at my kitchen table, showing Theo a glossy brochure for some elite prep school, a school I hadn't even heard of, much less could afford. When I told her that, she didn't blink. Well, she said, stirring her overpriced herbal tea. Some environments are simply better for children. Not every mother understands that. I bit my tongue. But that was the moment I started setting boundaries. Limited visits, clear rules. And that's when she turned cold. Margaret didn't want to be a grandmother. She wanted to take over, to erase me and rewrite the narrative with herself at the center. It all came to a head the day Theo came home from her house and asked, "Mommy, do you think I'd be happier living with Grandma?" That question hit me like a brick to the chest. 2 weeks later, a thick envelope arrived by certified mail, Custody papers. Margaret was petitioning for full custody of my son. Not shared custody. Full. The document was brutal. It painted me as emotionally unstable, financially incompetent, and utterly unfit to raise Theo. She even dug up old notes from therapy, twisting my grief into some kind of indictment against my capability as a mother. And the worst part, some of it wasn't entirely false. Yes, I was grieving. Yes, I was scraping by, but I showed up for my son every single day. I was his safe place. The idea that she could waltz in and take him away because I didn't fit her polished mold was suffocating. I called my sister, Lena. Within an hour, she was at my door, reading through the legal papers with a fury only big sisters possess. She's playing dirty. But you're not going to let her win. I hired a public defender, kind man, but overworked. His advice was simple: stay calm, document everything. Meanwhile, Margaret rolled in with one of the top family lawyers in the county, a shark in a silk suit. I started building my defense. I documented every interaction, every school report, every note from Theo's pediatrician. At night, when Theo was asleep, I sat on the living room floor, papers spread out like armor, reruns humming in the background to keep my mind from unraveling, and Margaret. She wasn't done. She called Child Protective Services. Anonymous tip. Claimed I left Theo alone during the day. A caseworker showed up unannounced while I was on a Zoom call. Theo was sitting at the kitchen table in his pajamas, building a Lego dinosaur. I answered every question, gave her a tour of our modest 2-bedroom rental, handed over contact information for teachers and doctors. She left politely, but the fear stayed. Theo, in his innocent way, tried to shield me. He drew me a picture stick, figures of the two of us holding hands in front of our house, above my cartoon head, in shaky 6-year-old handwriting. It said, "I love you more than everything." I pinned it to the fridge like a battle flag. I wasn't giving up, not on my son. The night before the final custody hearing, I found Theo sitting cross-legged on his bedroom floor, scribbling something on lined notebook paper. "What are you working on, buddy?" I asked. He looked up, serious beyond his years. "I'm writing a letter. For the judge." My heart twisted. He folded the paper carefully and slid it into his Spider-Man backpack, just in case. The next morning, as we sat in that sterile courtroom, Theo wore his favorite navy sweater with the little dinosaur patch on the sleeve. I packed him an extra snack, braided his hair into a neat little bun, just how he liked it. Margaret swept in, draped in designer fabrics, her lawyer flanking her like royalty. I kept my focus on Theo's small hand in mine. I had told my truth, presented every piece of evidence. Now, it was out of my hands. When the judge said, "We're ready to make a ruling," my stomach dropped. And then, Theo stood up. Sometimes, you fight with everything you have, and sometimes, the person you're fighting for fights right back in ways you never expected. When Theo stood up in that courtroom, holding his little folded letter, it felt like the world stopped. But to understand what led to that moment, you have to know what came before, the slow, exhausting grind of it all. After Aaron died, life didn't shatter all at once. It chipped away, bit by bit. Paying rent with freelance gigs that barely covered groceries, fielding polite but pointed questions from neighbors who didn't know what to say to a widow with a child, pretending I wasn't unraveling every time Theo looked up at me with those wide, searching eyes. He was 6. He shouldn't have been the one holding me together, but in a lot of ways, he was. We had our little routines. Mornings were cereal and cartoons. Afternoons were kindergarten and me trying to squeeze in client work between laundry loads. Nights were when the ache hit hardest. That's when Theo would crawl up beside me on the couch, blanket tucked under his chin, and whisper, It's okay. Mommy, I'm here. No judgment, no questions, just presence. But Margaret Langston, she had a different kind of presence. At first, it was subtle. She'd drop by with casseroles I didn't ask for, offering unsolicited advice disguised as concern. He needs more structure. Emily. Boys thrive on routine, as if we didn't have one, as if my every breath wasn't scheduled around Theo's needs. Then it got bolder. Snide comments at family gatherings, undermining me in front of Theo, the day she criticized his mismatched socks right in front of him. I saw his little shoulders hunch inward. That was the moment I realized this wasn't grief. This was an invasion. She wasn't here to help. She was here to take over. It came to a head one afternoon when I found her at my kitchen table, spreading out brochures for some elite private school, a place with tuition that cost more than my annual income. When I told her it wasn't possible, she didn't even flinch. Well, she said, stirring her imported tea, some environments are simply better for children. Stability. Emily. Not every mother understands that. That was her favorite word, stability. And by stability, she meant control. I started setting boundaries. Visits became limited, clear rules. But Margaret didn't take kindly to fences. 2 weeks later, the custody papers arrived. It wasn't a conversation. It wasn't a request. It was an ambush. When I opened that envelope and saw the words, "Petition for full custody," my hands went numb. I sat on the kitchen floor, clutching the letter, while Theo sat a few feet away, building a Lego fortress, blissfully unaware that his world was being yanked out from under him. Margaret had always been relentless, but this was war. She claimed I was emotionally unstable, that I was financially incapable, that I was too soft to raise a boy into a man. The parts that stung most were the ones with a kernel of truth. Yes, I was grieving. Yes, I was stretched thin. But none of that made me a bad mother. I called Lena. She was there within the hour, marching into my kitchen like she was ready to burn Margaret's house down herself. She read through the papers with a grim set to her jaw. She's not playing fair, Em. But you're not going to let her win. Easier said than done. I couldn't afford a fancy lawyer. I hired a public defender, kind-hearted, but drowning in cases, his advice was basic. Be calm. Be respectful. Document everything. Meanwhile, Margaret rolled out the big guns. She hired a top-tier family lawyer, the kind who builds careers on tearing people apart in court. It was David versus Goliath. And I didn't even have a slingshot. But what I did have was Theo. And I had the truth. So I started building my defense. Every night. After Theo went to bed, I'd sit on the living room floor, papers spread out like armor, school reports showing his progress, pediatrician notes confirming his health, emails from teachers praising his kindness, his focus, his friendships. I documented every interaction with Margaret, every passive-aggressive text, every backhanded comment. Still, Margaret wasn't done. One morning, right in the middle of a client Zoom call, Child Protective Services knocked on my door. An anonymous tip. They said, "Someone claimed I left Theo home alone during the day." It didn't take a genius to guess who someone was. Theo sat at the kitchen table in his pajamas, building a Lego dinosaur, while I gave the caseworker a tour of our modest home. I answered every question, offered contact info for Theo's teachers and doctors. The woman was professional, even kind, but her presence lingered like smoke after a fire. That night, after Theo went to bed, I curled up on the laundry room floor and cried into a basket of unfolded clothes. The next morning, Theo handed me a drawing, stick figures of us holding hands in front of our house. Above my cartoon head, in red crayon, he wrote, "I love you more than everything." I hung it on the fridge like a battle flag. I wasn't giving up, but the weight of it all It was crushing. One evening, I found Theo in his room, scribbling furiously on a piece of lined notebook paper. He looked up, his face serious in a way 6-year-olds shouldn't be. "I'm writing a letter," he said. "For the judge." My throat tightened. "That's very sweet, buddy. But it's okay. Mommy." He cut me off gently. "I won't say anything mean about Grandma. I just want them to know what it's like to be with you." He folded the paper with careful precision and slipped it into his Spider-Man backpack, just in case. I wanted to tell him no, that it wasn't his job to fix this. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew what he was trying to do. He wasn't trying to fix it. He was trying to be heard. The night before the final hearing, I barely slept. Lena came over with snacks I couldn't stomach and a folder of old photos. Theo's 3rd birthday, his first day of preschool, selfies of us baking cookies with flour on our faces. "You have everything you need," she said, squeezing my hand. "You just have to let them see who you really are." Simple words, but they anchored me. The next morning was gray and cold. Theo wore his favorite navy sweater, the one with the little dinosaur patch on the sleeve. I braided his hair back into a small bun, packed an extra snack, and held his hand all the way to the courthouse. Margaret arrived in her usual armor designer coat, expensive shoes, that icy smile she wore like a weapon. Her lawyer flanked her, briefcase gleaming like a trophy. I kept my focus on Theo's small, warm hand in mine. By the time we sat down in that courtroom, I had presented everything I could. I had told my truth, calmly, respectfully. I had shown the judge who we were. Our life wasn't perfect, but it was real. It was ours. When the judge said, "We're ready to make a ruling," my heart sank. I thought it was over, but then Theo stood up. That's the thing about kids. You spend so much time trying to protect them. You forget how much they see, how much they understand. And sometimes, when you least expect it, they stand up and speak the truth you've been fighting to prove all along. When Theo stood up, clutching that folded letter, time didn't just slow it folded in on itself. Every sound in the courtroom vanished. No more shuffling papers. No more lawyers murmuring. Just a 6-year-old boy in a navy sweater, walking forward with the kind of focus most adults couldn't muster. "Your Honor," he said, his voice soft but steady. "I want to read something." Margaret froze. Her lawyer blinked, like this wasn't in the script. Even the judge looked momentarily stunned, glancing from Theo to me. "You wrote something, son?" the judge asked, his tone gentler than it had been all morning. Theo nodded. "Yes, sir. It's for you." He stepped up to the desk, unfolded his lined notebook paper with deliberate care, smoothing it out with both palms like it was the most important document in the room. Maybe it was. "My name is Theo Green," he began. "I'm 6. I like dinosaurs, grilled cheese sandwiches, and playing with my mom." That simple sentence cracked the tension like glass underfoot. "I want to live with my mom," he said, voice clear. Not defiant, just sure. The courtroom didn't move. The judge leaned in, elbows on the desk, chin resting on folded hands. Every pair of eyes was locked on Theo, except mine. I couldn't look away, even if I tried. Theo kept reading, his little fingers gripping the paper tighter. "My mom gives me hugs when I feel bad. She makes pancakes on Sundays and lets me pour the syrup even when I spill. She laughs at my jokes, even when they don't make sense. When I have nightmares, she lets me sleep in her bed. She calls me her heart." I felt it then, the burn behind my eyes, but I didn't blink. I wasn't going to miss this. Sometimes we miss my dad. Theo continued, his voice steady. "We cry together. Then she tells me stories about him, and we light a candle and say good things. She says it's okay to be sad and okay to be happy again. 2. He paused, looked up at the judge with those solemn, knowing eyes. I know Grandma loves me, but she says my mom is too soft. I think soft is good. I don't want to live somewhere that doesn't let me feel things. I want to stay with the person who lets me be a kid. He folded the letter back up, careful and slow, then looked around the room. His gaze wasn't challenging. It wasn't angry. It was simply true. I just thought you should know. Thank you. Theo turned, walked back to me, and slid onto the bench beside me. His small hand found mine without searching, fingers curling around mine like they'd always belonged there. I couldn't speak, could barely breathe, but I squeezed his hand back. For a long moment, the courtroom stayed frozen. Even Margaret had dropped her mask, her eyes fixed on the polished wood of the defense table. Her lawyer sat stiffly, adjusting his tie, but said nothing. The judge sat back, exhaling slowly. You could feel the weight of the moment settle into the walls. This court acknowledges the statement given by the minor, Mr. Theo Green, he said finally. His voice had shifted less official, more human. While we typically avoid placing children in the position of testifying, it is clear that his words were his own and reflect a deep emotional clarity. He turned to Margaret's lawyer, voice firming again. I have reviewed the petition and all supporting evidence submitted by Mrs. Langston and her counsel. There is no documented abuse, no medical concern, and no professional testimony indicating Miss Green is unfit as a parent. Margaret's lips parted, but before she could speak, the judge lifted his hand, silencing her. The court does not consider financial disparity sufficient grounds to remove a child from the primary caregiver, particularly when the child's emotional and developmental well-being is stable and demonstrably bonded. Each word felt like a brick being removed from the wall I'd been backed into for months. And furthermore, the judge continued, his gaze softening as it landed on me. The child has expressed a sincere and articulate desire to remain with his mother. This court finds that Miss Green is fit to retain full legal and physical custody of her son. I heard the words, I understood them, but it still felt like they were happening to someone else. Margaret sat frozen, hands white-knuckled around her leather purse, her face a study in denial. As for visitation, the judge added, arrangements may be discussed through mediation. However, the court sees no reason to pursue permanent removal of custody. It was over. The 2-ton weight that had been pressing down on my chest for months lifted, just like that. My legs felt unsteady. My hands shook, but I managed to pull Theo into my arms. He tucked his face into my neck, arms wrapped tight like he was holding me up this time. As we gathered our things, I didn't look at Margaret, not once. There was nothing left to say. She'd had her chance to be family. Instead, she chose to be an adversary. We walked past her, step by deliberate step. Outside the courthouse, the cold air hit my face, but it didn't sting. Not this time. The sky was still gray, the world still imperfect, but something had shifted. Theo looked up at me, squinting against the light. Did I do okay? Mommy? I knelt down, cupped his face in my hands, and kissed his forehead. You saved us. We didn't speak much on the ride home, but words weren't necessary. His hand never left mine. That evening, the house felt different. Nothing had changed. The furniture was the same. The lingering scent of lavender from our breakfast candle was still in the air, but the weight was gone. The invisible pressure that had seeped into every corner of our home had lifted. I found Theo's letter taped to the fridge later that night, held in place with a dinosaur magnet. His name was scrawled at the bottom in red crayon, a tiny heart drawn beside it. I stood there for a long time, reading it again, line by line, until the words blurred and I had to sit down. He had written that letter for me, not because I asked, not because he thought it would fix anything, but because he knew. He felt the bond we shared, and in his own way, he stood up to protect it. That kind of love, it's not taught. It's lived. For months, I had fought tooth and nail to prove I was enough, that my love, my care, my presence were valid. And in the end, it wasn't the evidence or the legal arguments that tipped the scales. It was Theo, standing up, speaking his truth. He showed everyone what really mattered. As I tucked him into bed that night, he grabbed my hand. "Can we call Daddy's number like we used to?" It was a tradition we'd started after Aaron passed, leaving voicemails on his old phone number, knowing no one would answer. A way for Theo to stay connected. I held the phone to his ear as he whispered, "Daddy." The judge said, "I get to stay with Mommy." I was brave, just like you. I couldn't hold back the tears that time. Some battles aren't won with noise or force. Sometimes, the quietest moments carry the loudest victories. That day, in that courtroom, my son reminded me of something Margaret never understood. Soft isn't weak. Soft is where the strongest bonds are built. And Theo's voice, small, clear, unwavering, had cut through every lie, every doubt, every polished accusation. In the end, it wasn't a lawyer who saved us. It was a little boy who knew where home truly was. The day after the hearing, the house felt the same, but I didn't. The walls hadn't moved. The couch was still sagging in its usual spot. The refrigerator still hummed, holding Theo's drawings under mismatched magnets. But there was a stillness now, not the heavy, suffocating kind, a quiet that felt earned, solid. We had survived, but more than that, we had won. That morning, Theo woke up before me, his hair sticking up in every direction. He tugged me into the kitchen, still in his dinosaur pajamas, insisting on making cereal all by himself. Milk splashed onto the counter. Cheerios rolled under the fridge. I didn't care. I let the moment be messy. For months, my days had been spent defending my motherhood. Every interaction had felt like evidence in a trial. Every hug, every bedtime story, every sandwich cut into Theo's favorite dinosaur shapes, proof that I was enough. Now, for the first time in what felt like forever, I could just be his mom. No performance, no defense, just us. Later that afternoon, I found Theo's letter still taped to the fridge, his red crayon signature, that little heart. I traced it with my fingertip, letting the truth of it sink in. He hadn't written that letter because he thought it would help the case. He wrote it because he saw me. Because in his world, where things are simple and pure, love speaks louder than accusations. To him, there had never been a question of where he belonged. That realization settled into my bones in a way no court ruling ever could. Margaret never apologized, not for the custody suit, not for the CPS call, not for the months of whispered insults disguised as concern. We met once more, weeks later, in a cold mediation room to discuss visitation rights. She arrived with her lawyer, polished and composed, as if the courtroom humiliation had never happened. I didn't come to fight. I came to set terms. Supervised visits, once a month, no overnights, boundaries drawn with a pen as firm as my resolve. Margaret agreed, reluctantly. She never said the words "I'm sorry," but in the tight set of her jaw, the way she couldn't meet my eyes, I saw it, the admission she'd never say out loud. She had lost. Not to me, to the truth. And honestly, that was enough. Theo still loves his grandma in his own way. A child's heart doesn't hold grudges the way adults do, But I knew then I wasn't going to let her twist that love into a weapon again. Back home, life didn't magically become easier. The bills still came. Freelance clients still ghosted me. But the invisible weight pressing down on my chest had eased. Every time I packed Theo's lunchbox, every time I walked him to school, it was no longer with the frantic need to prove myself. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was reclaiming my life and motherhood. It wasn't what I once thought it had to be. For so long, I'd believed that being a good mother meant being invulnerable, that showing weakness, grieving, needing help, being soft was a flaw. Margaret's voice had been in my head, telling me I wasn't enough, but Theo showed me otherwise. Being a mother isn't about having a perfect home or a six-figure salary. It's not about projecting strength that's cold and sharp. Real strength is softer than that. It bends, but doesn't break. It stays when things are ugly. It holds space for tears, for laughter, for all the messy, human parts of loving someone. Strength is the hand you reach for in the dark. It's a 6-year-old boy standing up in court, speaking his heart when the adults have made things too complicated. That lesson. I carry it with me now, every night, after Theo's asleep. I still tiptoe down the hallway. I peek into his room, watch him sprawled across his bed, one leg kicked free of the blanket, his stuffed tiger clutched tight like it holds the secrets of the universe. That's when I exhale. That's when the fear dissolves. We're okay. More than okay. We're whole. I still have the letter. Not the crumpled version he read in court, that one's framed now. A quiet trophy of what we fought for. But the original draft, the one he scribbled on lined notebook paper. Spelling mistakes and all that stays taped to the fridge. It's not just a memory, it's a reminder. A reminder that I don't need anyone's permission to be enough. Not Margaret's, not the court's, not even my own self-doubt. Theo knew it all along. If you're listening to this, if you're a parent or someone who's ever had to fight for someone you love, you understand. You know the panic of being told you're not enough. You know how it feels to be underestimated, dismissed, pushed to the edge of what you can bear. But I hope you also know this quiet strength is still strength. You don't need to be loud to be powerful. You don't need to be perfect to be worthy. Sometimes, standing your ground is enough. Sometimes, sitting beside your child on a worn-out couch, holding their hand, showing up even when you're exhausted, that's the kind of strength the world doesn't always see. But it matters. And if no one's told you today, you're doing better than you think. Theo's letter didn't win us the case. The truth did. His letter simply reminded everyone of what that truth looked like through a child's eyes. Clear, simple, uncompromising. We belong together. Margaret tried to rewrite our story. She came at us with money, influence, and polished lies. But in the end, none of that could erase what we had built day by day, hug by hug, pancake by pancake. This wasn't a victory parade. No balloons, no celebrations, just a quiet morning in a modest kitchen, a little boy eating cereal, and a mother who had finally stopped questioning if she was enough. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever had to fight for your place, your worth, or your right to love without conditions, I see you, and I hope you see yourself in this story too. Because sometimes, the battles we fight aren't about proving something to others. Sometimes, they're about proving it to ourselves. And if a 6-year-old boy can stand up in a courtroom and speak his truth, maybe you can too. Before we go, I want to ask, where are you listening from right now? What's your story? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear it, because quiet strength deserves to be heard.